What's up, y'all? I had a request from one of you to do a tutorial on the Stockfleth redistribution move, so here it is. The Stockfleth move is an espresso redistribution technique invented at a cafe called Stockfleth in Oslo, Norway. Now there are numerous different ways to do this, so I'm gonna start by showing you the classic traditional Stockfleth move, and then we're gonna go into how I do it now. So before we dive into the redistribution technique itself, I'm gonna say that it all starts with the setup. You wanna get your coffee in your portafilter as clean and neat as you possibly can. You wanna build this nice little even mountain. You don't want a bunch of coffee loaded up on one side of the portafilter. You don't want any big gaps or channels. You want it as uniform as possible. This is gonna make it easy for you to redistribute cleanly and consistently every time, which is gonna lead to better tasting extractions. All right, now into the classic Stockfleth. The first person I ever saw do this was Tim Wendelboe way back in the day, and he did it just about as perfect as it can be done. So see what I got. You're gonna start with your coffee in your portafilter, that neat little mountain that we talked about. Using your dominant hand, you're gonna take your thumb and your pointer finger and make a little L shape with it. You're gonna place that L on the portafilter like so. So to get this going, you're gonna drag that L down a little bit just to catch some of the coffee, and then you're gonna rotate your hand in the portafilter in opposite directions. And you always wanna aim for the empty spots. Whatever spots you're trying to fill, just look at those and subconsciously your hand's gonna do the magic for you. Once you get all the way around, you're gonna reset, grab that pile again, and take it for another round, always focusing on the empty spots. Now it's important to drag a little bit of this coffee down in the first step, because if you don't catch some of the coffee, what you might end up doing is just rotating around this pile of coffee that's just sitting in the center of the portafilter, and you're kind of missing the whole point here. Once your coffee bed has even coverage and you've filled in all those empty spots, you can swipe off any excess that you want, if you have any. Now, the end motion or the swipe is really important because that's gonna help dictate the dose that you get in the portafilter. And it's important to note the placement of your finger on the top of that portafilter. So on your final swipe, if you have a really relaxed finger and you've got a little bit of space between the portafilter and the top of the coffee, you're gonna leave a little bit more coffee in there. If your finger's really rigid and it's pressing into the coffee, you're gonna scoop a little bit more out. So neither way is right or wrong, it just depends on what you wanna get out of it. Just take note of how your finger is. I usually use like a nice little neutral finger and just try to swipe as evenly as possible. If you weigh it out and you find that you've still got too much coffee in there, you can go ahead and make your finger a little bit more rigid and scoop a little bit more out. It's no big deal. So that's the classic or traditional Stockfleth. Now the way I do it employs all the same principles. I just rotate in the reverse direction. So I'll use that same L shape, put it on the portafilter, and then to start, I'll push off with my index finger just ever so slightly to the left. And that's gonna grab a little bit of that coffee to get the motion going. And then, again, rotate my hand in the portafilter in opposite direction, focusing on the empty spots in the coffee bed. Wherever you need the most attention, that's where you're gonna focus your energy on. The reason I started doing it like this is because I found I could do it a little bit more consistently, and it also didn't require me to stick my elbows out as far, so I could do it with my hands really close to my body to take up less space behind the bar, which was helpful for me. Now, one thing to take note of when you do it this way is you wanna make sure that your pointer finger is across the entire portafilter the whole time, so that it's resting on both sides of the basket. If this isn't happening, sometimes your finger can slip down and dig into the coffee bed, making things a little bit more uneven. This is also something to pay attention to on that final swipe. You never want your index finger to be free floating, or it might dive into the coffee, creating a pit. You want it to be resting on both sides of the basket so you can do this as even as possible. For some people, it's a little challenging to do full rotations at first, so I'll start some people like this. Take the pile, push off, bring it halfway around the portafilter and stop. Then reset using your index finger. Just push that pile straight through the empty spots that you see and get the pile back to the top of the portafilter. From then, you can push off one more time and do another half rotation and push up again. Now this takes a little bit longer, but it's also easier to learn. So once you feel comfortable with this, you can move on to full rotations. Now when you start learning this, you wanna take it as slow as you possibly can. Don't rush it, focus on getting it right. The speed will come later. Now here are a couple things that'll help it be a little bit more consistent overall. Every time you do a rotation around the portafilter, you're gonna be getting a little bit more coffee in the portafilter. So if I go 2 times around the world and then wipe off the excess, maybe I'm getting 19.3 grams of coffee. If I go 4 or 5 times around the world and then swipe off the excess is gonna be less. I'm gonna be ending up with a higher dose, maybe 19.7. If I keep going around and around and around, I may just pack that whole 20 grams in there. What we wanna do to be as consistent as we can is make that initial pile in the portafilter, again, as evenly distributed and as consistent as it can be from the get-go, and then get your rotations down to where you're doing them the same amount of time every time. Now, the amount of rotations that you do doesn't really matter as long as you're being consistent, but with that being said, I'll generally do 2 rotations and then swipe off to get my final dose because I don't wanna touch the coffee more than 3 times. It's just unnecessary, it takes up too much time. Plus, even if you're doing it perfect, if you're kind of playing with things excessively, you have the potential to do more harm than good in the long run. So that's the Stockfleth redistribution move. I love doing it. It's a super fun thing to do. Ever since back in the day, it was one of my favorite parts about being a barista. There's just something really cool about it. I was super stoked when I learned it, so hopefully this helps. And remember, the keys are start with a nice, evenly distributed pile in the portafilter before you get going. Whichever way you do it, normal or reverse, make sure you catch a little coffee off the get-go so that you're not just rotating around a pile of coffee and doing nothing. Keep it consistent with the number of rotations you do, and then pay attention to how much tension is on your finger for that final swipe so that you can get the dose as consistent as possible, and make sure that your finger doesn't fall into the portafilter when you're doing this either. Hope this was useful. If you cats find this helpful at all, feel free to share this or use it in your training program, no big deal. If you're liking the content, please like, give me a thumbs up or subscribe. Really enjoy making the videos. It means a lot that y'all watch, and keep it real with that Stockfleth move, man. Just crush it. Peace.